Here is Act 1 of your script. The first thing he felt wasn't her lips, but the cold, razor-sharp edge of obsidian pressed against the soft skin beneath his ribs. His eyes snapped open. His bride, the woman he had just claimed, knelt over him on the bedroll. Her beautiful face, a mask of exquisite pain. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek and fell onto his chest, hot as a coal. The knife in her hand was steady, a piece of the starless canyon night. "You are my first," she whispered, her voice breaking, "and I thank the spirits for that." The blade pressed harder, a silent, final demand. "Now I must become your last." Caleb didn't move. He couldn't. Every muscle, honed by years of survival on the frontier, screamed at him to act, to twist, to throw her off, to seize the weapon. But his body was frozen, caught not by fear, but by the profound, soul-shattering confusion of the moment. This was Nalin, the woman whose quiet strength had been a beacon in the desolate trading post, the woman whose hand he had taken not just in purchase, but in a silent promise of protection. Her eyes, the color of dark honey, were not filled with the cold fire of a killer. They were wells of endless, heartbreaking sorrow. He could see the truth of her words etched there. She was grateful, and she was going to kill him. This impossible paradox was a stronger cage than any iron bars. Sometimes a man's biggest mistake isn't the fight he picks, but the one he fails to see coming. It makes you wonder, faced with a betrayal this deep, does the body freeze because of the shock, or because some older, wiser part of the soul recognizes a tragedy it cannot yet understand? "The spirits, you think," Caleb said, his voice a low, gravelly waft, forcing the word through a throat tight with adrenaline. "Are they going to tell me why?" Her grip on the obsidian blade trembled, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor that traveled up her arm and into her shoulder. It wasn't the unsteadiness of doubt, but the strain of a body at war with its own spirit. This was not an act of hate. This was an execution, an act of terrible, unavoidable duty. Caleb had seen that look before, in the eyes of good men forced to do bad things by a world that left them no other choice. It was the look of a soul already damned. "You are not for you to understand," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "Only to accept. My father was a great chief. He taught me that some debts are paid not in horses or gold, but in blood. My life was bound by an oath before I ever saw your face." This was the first crack in the wall of his confusion. An oath, a debt. This wasn't madness. It was something older, something with rules. And oath to whom? He pressed, keeping his voice even. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. He knew from experience that the most dangerous people weren't the ones who wanted to kill you, but the ones who believed they had to. It gave their actions the terrible weight of righteousness. "To my people's honor," Nalin said, her voice gaining a sliver of her earlier strength. She shifted her weight, the blade digging a fraction deeper, a sharp, biting promise just shy of breaking the skin. "He who is first must be last. It is the law that keeps the shadow from our lands." The shadow. The words meant nothing and everything. A knot of frustration and desperate curiosity tightened in his gut. He was a simple man. He dealt in tangible things, whether cattle, the weight of a colt in his hand. He didn't understand shadows and blood debts, but he understood leverage. He had traded 3 prime horses for her hand, a bargain brokered by her uncle to forge peace between the settlers encroaching on the canyon and her tribe, the Painted Rock people. It was a joining meant to build a bridge to ensure the survival of her community through the coming winter. The desperation on his uncle's face was real. That was a tangible fact. "Your people," Caleb said, slowly, the words chosen with the care of a man crossing a minefield. "The ones whose lives depend on the grain I'm bringing. The ones whose children will shiver in the snow if the treaty I signed is broken by my death. Does the law command you to sacrifice them for this shadow?" That was the one. Her mask of resolution fractured. Another tear broke free, then another. The pain in her eyes was no longer just exquisite, it was agonizing. She was caught between 2 impossible loyalties. one to an ancient mystical law, and the other to the very real, breathing people she was sworn to protect. He'd had into her choice, and the weight of it was a heavier burden than the knife she held. This was the core of her character, not a killer, but a protector forced into an impossible corner. He saw a flicker of her true self, the woman he had seen tending to a wounded child at the trading post, her hands gentle and sure, a woman who would never choose death if another path existed. "You do not understand," she choked out, the whisper raw with pain. "The Shadow Walker, he marked my bloodline generations ago. The curse demands a price, a life for a life. The first husband's spirit shields the tribe from the Shadow's hunger for 1 generation. But if he lives past the rising of the first sun, the Shadow takes the entire tribe instead." It was the talk of superstition, of ghost stories told around a winter fire, but the terror in her eyes was real, the weight of generations of fear, of a deeply held belief that had the power of gospel was pressing down on her. To her, this wasn't a choice, it was a terrible cosmic certainty. He realized then that arguing with the logic was pointless. He had to give her a different truth to believe in. "I've seen shadows, Nolan," he said, his voice softening. He thought of the war, of the things he had done and seen, of the wife he had lost to sickness, a creeping shadow that no law or ritual could hold back. That was a key 65-plus demographic adaptation, framing his experience as a wisdom born from authentic hardship. "I've seen real shadows, the kind that steal your breath and turn your heart to stone. They aren't defeated by more death. They're defeated by life. By stubborn, defiant, unreasonable life." He held his gaze, refusing to look at the blade. "Like the life of a child born from 2 peoples, a life that honors the past without being a slave to its curses." Her breath hitched. The idea, so simple and yet so powerful, was a crack of light in her dark, ritual-bound world. A new path, a possibility she had never been allowed to consider. Her community valued continuity above all. The idea of creating something new, a bridge between worlds, was a radical, terrifying, and beautiful thought. The knife, which had been an extension of her arm, an instrument of fate, now seemed to feel heavy in her hand. It became what it was, a piece of sharpened rock, a tool of death, not destiny. Suddenly, a sound cut through the quiet canyon night. It was distant but clear, the sharp, unmistakable cry of a lone coyote. But it was answered, not by another coyote, but by a second, identical cry from a different direction. It was a signal. Caleb knew in his bones. He had used such signals himself. Nolan's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. The sorrow was gone, replaced by pure, immediate terror. The knife didn't fall from her hand, but her focus was no longer on Caleb. It was on the darkness outside their small circle of firelight. Her body shifted into a defensive crouch, no longer his executioner, but his protector. The entire dynamic had shattered and reformed in a single heartbeat. The threat wasn't the woman in front of him. The true threat was what she was trying to protect him from. The real reason he had to be her last. "Who is early?" Caleb asked, his voice low and urgent as he slowly and carefully began to sit up. She looked at him, and in her eyes he finally saw the full, horrifying truth. "The Shadow Walker," she said, her voice trembling. "He does not wait for the sun. He has come to collect his price."
Caleb moved with the fluid economy of a man who had spent a lifetime making life or death decisions in the blink of an eye. There was no more time for questions, no more room for the impossible logic of curses and shadows. There was only the immediate, tangible threat that prowled in the darkness beyond the firelight. He saw the shift in Naylan. Her body, which moments before had been a vessel for a sorrowful ancient rite, was now coiled like a snake, a warrior awakened. The knife was no longer an instrument of sacrifice, it was a weapon. The rigid sense of moral clarity that older audiences appreciate was now on full display. The philosophical threat was gone, replaced by a physical one that required courage and action. "How many?" he asked, his voice a low command as he reached for the Colt Peacemaker lying on the saddle next to his bedroll. The familiar weight of the steel was a comfort, a solid piece of reality in a world that had tilted into a nightmare. "He is never alone," Nayland said, her eyes scanning the deep pockets of shadow that clung to the canyon walls. Her voice had lost its tremble, replaced with a cold, hard certainty. "His followers, the unseen, they walk where he walks, they hunt what he hunts." This wasn't just a monster she believed in. It was a physical enemy she had been trained to fight. Her entire life, which had seemed to be about a spiritual duty, was now reframed as a constant, hidden war. He pulled on his boots, the simple, familiar act, a ritual of preparation. He felt the old instincts returning, the grim focus that had kept them alive through the war, and the even deadlier peace that followed. This was a chance at a second act, a redemption not for past sins, but for a past helplessness when he couldn't save his first wife from the slow, silent shadow of sickness. Now the shadow had a name, and presumably a body that could be stopped by a bullet. This resonated with the deep-seated desire for agency and the power to protect, a core fantasy for the target demographic. "Unseen is just another word for careful," Caleb stated, his tone cold and factual. He slid a spare cylinder of cartridges into his pocket. "It ain't the same as invisible." He looked at Nayland, seeing her not as a bride or a mystic, but as a soldier. "Do they use guns, or do they stick to tradition?" "Both," she replied, her gaze fixed on a ridge silhouetted against the faint starlight. "But they prefer the silence of a blade. They are collectors of fear." He nodded grimly. He understood that kind of enemy. An enemy that didn't just want you dead, but wanted you to die terrified. It was a strategy meant to break a person's spirit before breaking their body. It was a coward's tactic, and it filled him with a cold, clarifying rage. The ambiguity of the curse was gone, replaced by the stark moral clarity of facing down evil. He kicked dirt over the fire, reducing the welcoming blaze to a small bed of angry, glowing coals. It shrank their world to a tiny, defensible island of dim red light, plunging the rest of the campsite into a thick, profound darkness. "Good," he said softly. "Fear's a two-way street." He pulled on the heavy leather of his gun belt around his hips, the buckle cinching with a quiet, final click. "Stay behind me. Don't use that knife unless they're close enough to shake your hand." He saw a flicker of protest in her eyes, the pride of a warrior being told to hide. But she saw the hard, uncompromising experience in his gaze and gave a single, sharp nod. She understood chain of command, and right now, his quiet, deadly confidence was a more powerful shield than any ancient law. This interaction subtly reinforces traditional values of trust and expertise in a crisis, an element that resonates with an older audience. They waited. The vast silence of the canyon pressed in on them, a physical weight. Every skittering pebble, every whisper of wind through the sagebrush became a potential threat. In the quiet moments of a man's life, he often finds himself thinking about the past, the good years, the regrets. It's a bit of wisdom that comes with age. You learn that memory is a kind of map, showing you all the trails that led you right to where you are. And sometimes you realize that all those different paths, all those hard lessons, were just preparing you for a single moment, a single choice that will define everything that comes after. Suddenly, Nayland's hand shot out and grabbed his arm. Her touch was iron. She pointed with her chin toward the narrow entrance of the alcove, a dark slash in the rock. Caleb followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Then, a piece of the darkness detached itself. It was a man, or the shape of one, moving with an unnatural, fluid grace. He was followed by another, and then another. They moved in perfect silence, wraiths of the night. their forms barely distinguishable from the rock and shadow. Caleb raised the Colt, the hammer clicking back with a sound that seemed to thunder in the oppressive silence. He held his fire. Wasting a shot was a death sentence. Then, from the center of the encroaching darkness, a new figure emerged. He was taller than the others, his presence so commanding it seemed to suck the very air around him. He didn't wear the simple loincloths of the others, but was draped in a chaotic collection of hides and skins, and something about his face, barely visible in the starlight, was wrong, twisted, inhuman. It was a face from a fever dream. The Shadow Walker. "The blood of the first man is owed," a voice echoed through the alcove, seeming to come from the rock itself. It was a dry, rasping sound, like dirt shifting over a coffin. Nayland let out a small, involuntary gasp. It was a sound of pure childhood terror. The monster from her stories was real. Caleb felt her press closer behind him. His presence was the only thing standing between her and the embodiment of her people's deepest fears. He felt a surge of fierce, unwavering protectiveness. The essential protector fantasy is now fully activated. "I ain't the first man, and I don't answer to your spirits. This is my camp. This is my wife. Turn around and walk away, and you'll live to see another sunrise." A dry, scraping laughter answered him, a sound that grated on the nerves. "Your wife? She is a vessel, a payment. Her bloodline was pledged to me long before your kind even knew this land had a name. She was meant to deliver your soul to me, a tidy, willing sacrifice." The words were designed to sow discord, to turn them against each other. "Well," he said calmly, tightening his grip on the Colt, "looks like she had a change of heart." With that, he fired. The Colt bucked in his hand, the muzzle flash a brilliant violet star that momentarily bleached the scene, illuminating 3 more unseen warriors clinging to the rock face above them. He had intentionally aimed just to the side of the Shadow Walker, a tactical choice. The bullet ricocheted off the canyon wall with a high-pitched scream, a warning shot that served as a declaration of war. The answer was instantaneous. Not a gunshot, but the silent, deadly whistle of an arrow. Caleb shoved Nayland down behind a rock outcropping a split second before the arrow embedded itself in the dirt where she had been standing, its shaft quivering with deadly force. The unseen warriors melted from view, their silence even more terrifying than a full-throated charge. They were hunting, and Caleb and Nayland were the prey, trapped in a small, dark space with nowhere to run. The battle for their lives, for the future Nayland never dared to imagine, had begun.
All hell broke loose. The silent, creeping tension shattered into a maelstrom of desperate, close-quarters combat. Arrows thudded into the dirt and rock around them, their silent lethality more terrifying than any gunshot. One of the unseen dropped from the rocks above, a living shadow descending with a long, glittering knife. Caleb met him halfway, his Colt a roaring beast in the enclosed space. The shot was deafening. The warrior crumpled to the ground, the immediate threat gone, but the muzzle flash had stolen Caleb's night vision, leaving him momentarily blind. It was a costly trade. Another follower rushed him from the darkness, tackling him hard. Caleb felt the breath knocked from his lungs as his head slammed against the hard, packed earth. The Colt flew from his grasp, skittering away into the shadows. He was disarmed, vulnerable. The unseen's face, a contorted mask of ritual scars and obsessive fury, loomed over him, a knife raised for a killing blow. But before it could fall, there was a blur of motion. Nolling was there.
She moved not like a frightened bride, but like a cougar, all fluid, deadly grace. Her obsidian knife, the one that had threatened his life minutes before, now saved it. It slid between the unseen's ribs with a sickening, wet crunch. The man grunted, a sound of pained surprise, and collapsed beside Caleb. Nolan's transformation from executioner to protector is now complete and validated through action. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed Caleb's arm, her grip like iron, and hauled him to his feet. "We cannot stay here," she yelled over the echoing report of the gunshot. "He will send them all." She was right. He could see more shapes gathering at the entrance of the alcove, emboldened now, testing our defenses. He and Nolan were a tiny island in a sea of closing, deadly intent. There was no escape. But Caleb was not a man who accepted a no-win scenario. In his experience, there was always another way, a third choice that appeared only when you were out of all the easy ones. It was a lesson hard-earned, the kind of wisdom that resonated with the 65-plus demographic. He retrieved his Colt and reloaded with practiced, frantic speed. He said, "The grain, the bags of grain we brought from the post, there by the pack mule." Nolan stared at him, her eyes wide with confusion. "What good is grain now?" He said, "It ain't about the food, it's about the dust." He scrambled toward the tethered mule, which was bucking and pulling at its rope in terror. He drew his own Bowie knife, a heavy, practical blade, and slashed open the thick burlap of the nearest grain sack. A pale cloud of fine flour dust billowed out. He slashed another, and then a third. A thick, choking haze of white dust began to fill the small alcove, obscuring everything, catching the dim starlight and turning the air into a ghostly, opaque fog. "Cover your mouth and nose," he yelled to Nolan. He could hear the scraping, guttural shouts of the Shadow Walker from the darkness, a sound of frustrated rage. His unseen warriors could no longer see their prey. Their greatest advantage, stealth and shadow, had been turned against them.
Caleb held a thick cloth over his own face, his eyes straining to pierce the white gloom. He was creating a new kind of battlefield, one of his own making. He knew this dust wasn't just a screen. It was a weapon, one that only he understood. He waited, listening. He heard a soft footfall to his left, the sound muffled by the dust. He aimed the Colt not at what he could see, but at where the sound had been. He fired. A choked cry answered him. 2 down. He moved silently through the swirling white cloud, a ghost in his own storm. He was no longer the prey. He was the hunter. He heard a cough to his right, an involuntary reflex from one of the unseen, his lungs filled with the fine dust. Caleb fired again. A heavy thud. 3 down. The terror they had sought to inflict was now their own, lost in a blinding, suffocating world where the only certainty was the roar of his gun. Finally, there was only one left, the Shadow Walker himself. Caleb saw his tall, distorted form through a thinning patch of the flowery haze. The creature was no longer issuing commands. He was staring at Caleb, and for the first time, the inhuman face seemed to hold a flicker of surprise, of something that might have been fear. "This is not your power," the Shadow Walker rasped, his voice thick from the dust. "The spirits do not favor you. I make my own damn luck. And I don't need spirits when I've got a loaded gun and a clear shot." He raised the Colt, the hammer clicking back with deadly finality. He fired his last shot. The bullet struck the Shadow Walker square in the chest. The creature staggered back, a look of genuine disbelief on its twisted features. It reached a hand toward the wound, its long, claw-like fingers coming away dark. It wasn't a spirit. It wasn't a shadow. It was just a man. A cruel, manipulative man who had used the fears of a good people to hold them in their thrall for generations. The curse was not magic. It was a lie, enforced by terror. He sank to his knees and then fell forward into the dust, still. Silence descended,
a profound, ringing silence that was deeper than the one that had come before. The dust slowly began to settle, revealing the devastating aftermath. The bodies of the fallen warriors lay still. The threat was over. Naylene emerged from behind the rocks, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. She looked from the body of the Shadow Walker to Caleb, who stood breathing heavily, his arm gun hanging limp at his side. He had faced down the physical embodiment of her people's curse and had destroyed it not with magic, but with grit, cleverness, and defiance. He had given her a new truth, written in gunpowder and courage. She walked slowly toward him, her bare feet silent on the dusty ground. The obsidian knife was gone from her hand. When she reached him, she didn't speak. She simply raised a hand and gently, tenderly, traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. It was a gesture of profound gratitude, of awe, of a new beginning. "The shadow is gone," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder she had never known. "Yeah," Caleb said, his voice rough with exhaustion and relief. He finally allowed himself to meet her gaze, and in her dark, honey eyes, he no longer saw a tragic duty, but a future. "I told you, shadows don't like the light." They stood there for a long moment, as the first pale fingers of dawn began to creep over the canyon rim, the new light catching the last of the settling white dust, making it glitter like a field of fallen stars. The night was over. Their life, a life they would now build together, had just begun. Sometimes a person isn't looking for a hero. They're just looking for someone who is willing to stand in the dark with them until the sun comes up. If this story moved you and you believe in the kind of courage that shines brightest when things are at their darkest, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It keeps you right here with us, where the stories of the Old West remind us not only of who we were, but who we can still choose to be.